Sound check, 1, 2, 3. Sound check, 1, 2, 3.
Sound check, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Greetings, my name is Matt Adams. Welcome to our monthly educational program with the Visual Arts Alliance. VAA was founded in 1981 as an all-volunteer arts nonprofit that provides education and exhibition opportunities for Houston area artists and collectors. We do this through a series of activities. First, we have monthly programs such as what you're about to see today. We do juried exhibitions. Since 1981, we're up to doing 83 of those exhibitions. We have monthly artist critiques. We have monthly sketch socials. We have weekly artist check-ins, and we have occasional members workshops. All of these activities you can follow on our Facebook page and on our website. Please sign up for the newsletter. Most of what we do is free and open to the public. So you're welcome to join us for many things related to the arts scene in the Houston area. So with that said, we have our chairman of our programs committee, James Booker, ready to take us into our program today. James?
Yes. So today's program is a dialogue between curator Kelly Montana and artist Erik Hagen. Kelly Montana is the assistant curator at the Menil Drawing Institute, who is interested in the intersection of art, history, and politics. Most recently, she organized the Menil's Bryce Martin exhibit. Erik Hagen is an artist and water resources engineer based in Houston, whose work explores deep time sits at the intersection of art and science. They will now discuss the role of communication in the field of art and science, among some other topics, and introduce a new painting that transforms into a video in which the viewer virtually files through a ghostly Houston on the Sea, set in the year 2550. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Erik Hagen and Kelly Montana.
Great.
Wonderful.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you, both of you. Those are really lovely introductions. And
Yeah.
I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you so much to the VAA and to you for inviting me. It's a wonderful topic, and it's a wonderful day to do this.
Super. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thanks to the VAA for hosting me. And I'm honored to be a part of the program and to be here talking with you. So
Great.
Super.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just follow up on James's introduction, because I think there's so much in there as part of how you introduce yourself and your work as an artist. And so he talked about how you are an artist that works with deep time. Deep time is a real investment that you've made in your artwork. So can you, first of all, what is deep time, and what does that mean to you as an artist in your art practice?
Yeah, thanks. Great. No, deep time is very simply just it's a looking at time from a geologic perspective. So looking back over, even billions of years and putting time into a context like that. And so for me, time is longer time scales, including deep time, are the thread that ties through my artwork.
I see. And you also often talk about your work as being at the intersection of art, science, and communication. And I find that a really fascinating lens with which to think about your work. So can you sort of talk about each of those disciplines, how they manifest in your practice?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember my first my first job and my first big meeting, and I had as a scientist, and I was presenting sort of complex graphs, and I thought I was doing it very clearly, and I was very nervous. It was a board meeting, and afterwards, one of the board, it was great. I thought I was so successful, and the board member came up to me afterwards and said, "Erik, that I didn't understand a word, but that was a great presentation."
Seems like they don't. That doesn't quite align.
And I was like, huh. And I like challenges, so I spent the next 20 years working on communication and science policy. I worked in the science policy field for a while, and as an artist, of course, communication is part of what art is. It's some implicit in communicating with people. And as an artist, it took me a while to come around and bring science together into that circle of I'm passionate about science, and once I brought my art to encompass science, then I felt like I was speaking from a place that was more honest and that I could be passionate about.
I see. I see. So your art practice for a long time had been, so just to kind of clarify for people that don't know, you worked for many years as a water resources engineer.
That's right.
And you were also practicing art, making art. And so once you sort of brought your passion for talking about water and climate and that approach to communication and that approach to data, you sort of brought that into the more formal aspects of what you were doing with your art making.
That's right.
I see.
That's right. And it was really interesting to do that because there's a sort of a rational didactic way you can do that. It's very linear, but there's also a way to do that. I think it speaks more from the unconscious as well. And that's the trick for me. That's been bringing those two together, I think, has been getting at the heart of communication in a way that speaks to both the fine art world and to the science world.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I guess what I really love about your artist statement in that regard is that I think so many of us take for granted that communication is a part of these things, but I love that you make it such an explicit part of what it is that you're trying to do. I think there's a lot of I just love that's part of that statement and part of your practice. How about we look at some artwork, some of your new things, and I would love to talk through just the process of making them. I want to just understand like how you put these wonderful objects together, and let's have our audience look at some of these.
Okay, sure. Okay, so I think that was all muted. So
oh dear, okay.
Yeah,
So we're back
so
on.
back to the fossils of these are all fossils of the Anthropocene, and
okay, Anthropocene. What is the Anthropocene?
Yes, the Anthropocene is the age of humans. So it's the current geologic age, and these are the things that. So the works that you're seeing here are meant to be fossils that might be seen in 100 million years and are meant to be a portrait of us, the future humanity.
And generally, what is thought to be the time frame of the Anthropocene? Like when does it begin?
It's with the industrial age.
Okay.
Yeah. Here's this is fun. This is a plastic bottle. This is one of my favorite works. I don't know. And can you make out the shape of the plastic bottle? It's pointed up. There's a little lip there.
Yes,
and it's like
interesting. So let's stop on this one for a second. So this is what's the title on this one?
This one is called Fossils of the Anthropocene Plastic Bottle.
And when was the series first started?
This started back in 2000 and I want to say around 9 or 10.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And so we see here the media on this is pigments, plaster, cast plastic. Can you just talk about the layers that we're looking at here? How did you tell us about the process of making this work?
Absolutely. There's what I'll do is pull up a slide here, which is pretty cool because it actually shows you how this process works. And it's yeah, so this is all, I'm putting down material like a plaster, and then I'm watering it. And then you can see adding pigments. And this is, you can actually see the water that's coursing through and you can see it with the picking up the pigments and the plaster and moving it through. So it's actually, the process is like what the actual geologic processes that would be occurring.
That is really, that is such a beautiful shot to see those little, almost like rivets, those granules.
Isn't it amazing?
So slowly. So I'm really intrigued by this idea of how your process of making is meant to mirror geologic processes. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah,
in this
yeah,
work?
yeah. So for me, the transcendental part of what communicating with people was to evoke the geology. There's like my cat Prince in that one. And that was unintentional. This shows, these are two Lego pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And another two Lego pieces, you can see they've been tumbled in a rock tumbler, and they've picked up little tiny rocks and then kind of become embedded in the plastic.
Mm-hmm.
Then I put them in a matrix and I poured the plaster over them and let that harden, and then sanded away to reveal the rocks and the sort of just everything's to try to evoke this sense of deep time
Mm-hmm.
in the
Mm-hmm.
piece.
Yeah. So these kind of recreating these processes of weathering and things that happen kind of slowly over time.
That's right.
You're recreating them in a more almost like raucous
Yeah.
scenario, but almost like a little bit of it. Almost feels like a little destructive.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah. Oh, it's totally destructive.
So it's almost like adding like age and weathering to these objects.
Yeah. These are the frame on this one is acid etched, so it's a lacquer resist with pressed flat foliage, and then you can see that the almost like a fossilized imprint of a plant or something.
Mm-hmm. So fossils are almost working in two ways here. You have kind of actual objects that are meant to be evocative of fossils, but then you also have these imprints that are also reminiscent of prints that become embedded in places that are untouched by time.
Yeah.
Time really is so present in your practice. It comes in, and so it's kind of folded together in so many ways. Mm-hmm. I'm really interested in, we touched on some of the works that have Legos embedded in them. There was one that almost looked like dominoes. Is that correct? Is there something? No, there's just Legos that are in there.
There's lots of children's toys in general. They mostly I like to use plastic objects because they're so, from a materials choice, it's really important. I mean, there's such a great symbolic value in bringing in plastic. It's evocative of the plastic age. It's oil. It's climate change. And then the use of toys also in the fossil series is evocative too, because toys are something that we grow up and the toy's discarded. That person almost is lost in a way. And then so in the same way that the toy becomes a metaphor from a fossil perspective of humanity itself. So it's this like sort of wonderful image for me that I like to use.
Yeah, toys seem really kind of rich with meaning for you in these works. And I find that really interesting of thinking about that a toy is something that one leaves behind. As you kind of put it, it's this person that isn't there anymore. Like the child becomes an adult and that child is sort of gone in a sense. And they're also, the toys are something that are situated in the past as well. I guess what I'm interested in hearing you comment on is that it seems like there's a coalescing of lots of different ideas about time in a toy. Right. That's right. Something like it's in the terms of the Anthropocene, a toy is a contemporary object, but oftentimes artists use toys, or toys are thought to be something situated very much in the past. Yeah. Whereas in your practice, they're actually things that are situated more in the present, and the past that we're talking about is something much more complex. So I'm just interested in hearing you talk a little bit about how these different time scales work in your practice, your process of selecting these objects to bring them into the work, and just some comments.
I'll pull up the slides while we're talking. The slides are here. And to answer your question about time scales, I wanted to look at, for example, this brick, which was pulled out of White Oak Bayou.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been tumbled, it's been through the floodwaters of Harvey. It is, it has undergone generations of change, and it's become this artifact that has its own power. And part of it is the flooding, and part of it's the rebuilding and the coming together as a community in Houston. It was really a powerful thing. But this is part of the Memento Mori series, and these are where I'm taking little objects that might resonate for me personally, or might resonate from a natural science perspective, and then putting them, encasing them into plastic, and then pushing them forward into the future as little time capsules.
Right.
Because plastic's around forever. This is like going to be like amber. This frame might rot away, but that's going to be there somewhere as a fossil itself. And it's like a message. And it's funny, asked about the time, we're talking about deep time, and then, these memento mori pieces are like pushing forward over the next few hundred years. And then the map series, which we'll talk about, is looking out over a scale of 500 years. But if you think about it, that didn't occur to me until we talked. It's all looking forward. It's all the future.
Yeah.
So it's past huge time scales, present and future. And then here is, let's keep going with this, because there's a couple more memento mori pieces. That's the brick. I think the next one, this is fun. This is my father's old cell phone. And it itself is this, memento mori, which is, an antique that it's speaking to the ephemerality of the moment, that the objects have this life that is past. Remember, you die. And,
right.
And this was particularly evocative for me because my dad keeps a handwritten list on the phone. And I was holding onto this phone for a while, and then my uncle died, and he's number 4 on the list. And so when I was making this piece, I was thinking about him, and it really was a kind of a an homage to him, and kind of an emotional piece, because it's my dad's cell phone.
Yeah, absolutely. And this way of having this, and again, it's this object that you called it an antique. I think because I think sometimes you have people come through your studio, especially younger people, that just an object like that cell phone seems impossibly old. But I also think it's an interesting commentary on this sense of, a cell phone like that it's not so old, but in the sense of technological advancement, it is quite old, and the phones that we use right now are going to be impossibly antiquated in 5 years. So I think there's also something there about the waste, right? Of like this, of how much plastic comes and goes, how much of these materials come and go in our lives, and how something even as advanced and something that we hold on to for many, however long that each of us holds on to a particular phone. Again, it might not seem wasteful because it's not one use, right? You're getting rid of it, but there's also something about it that when you're talking on the scales that you're talking about, it is something that's incredibly disposable. It's incredibly disposable. That once the technology has advanced, you have a whole world full of these cell phones that are completely useless. So I find that one particularly interesting. And it's also interesting to hear you talk about the future orientation of these. It kind of adds this different dimension to the idea of memento mori, which I think you touched on a little bit, but if you kind of could again just take us back to baseline of like, what is a memento mori, and how does your work kind of relate to that trajectory in our history?
Well, my Latin's pretty rusty, read non-existent, but remember translates literally into remember you die, or remember one dies. I don't know which, but essentially, and so the idea that these objects have such an ephemerality to them, and you can't take it with you.
Right.
And this was really sort of, again, beaten home to me by my dad. We'd look at the stars in northern Minnesota, and he would say to me, Erik, in 100 years, we're all going to die.
Mm.
And none of this will matter.
Mm.
And I said, Dad, I'm 10. What are you talking about?
Yeah, and in our history, memento mori paintings are often, I think they're most consistently identified as being kind of still life paintings that have pictures of flowers or bounty, or kind of bounty from the garden. Oftentimes there's insects. A skull in there. There's often insects, and there's often like a flower that's like just starting to wilt. Yeah. Like as soon as you cut a flower at its perfect bloom, like you've killed it, right?
Reminding us of our mortality.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think, so I also think about the way you've adapted that into your work of this. There's this real idea of kind of human frailty and vulnerability, like our bodily frailty and vulnerability, but that there's also something, it's honoring this person, but as you said, it's honoring them in this way that whatever happens to this object, it's going to survive long past you, long past you and I. And you sort of, between it being plastic and you encasing it in resin, like who knows what's going to happen to it, but it's going to be around.
It will be.
So I think there's something really incredible about kind of collapsing those things onto each other, that this idea of kind of frailty, but also these things that are going to last far beyond us, that are in theory disposable. So I think it's very complicated.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Approaching these things.
And on point, and I know that you know this, and I don't know if our viewers can see it, but there is actually a mosquito in this piece right on the frame.
That's right. Yeah. So there's
it's a little memento mori, explicit nod to the Renaissance.
Absolutely. So for anyone that hasn't had the privilege of seeing this work in person, I encourage you to get in touch with Erik, because there is a perfect little insect that I don't know how you didn't squash it to get it. I was thinking about that. I was like, did you squash it and kill it to get it in there? Or how did you find this perfect specimen to lodge in there? But what I would love to turn to next is, I think for those familiar with your work, these are objects that they may have seen before and an understanding of your practice. I would love to start looking at works that you've been making recently. Can we look at some of the most recent stuff that you've been doing in your studio?
Yeah. So I've been we just flashed past a couple more memento mori, and then the most recent work I've been working on are these maps that show sea level rise. This is New Orleans that we're looking at now. This is Galveston and Texas City, all in 500 years, 300 to 500 years. And this is Miami in the Art Deco color palette. Also, so I'll just pause at the Miami map. But this all shows sea level rise moving forward. These are the more didactic maps that I was making that are more rational. These are built with our ArcGIS software, using, and then bringing it into PowerPoint, and then playing with colors and playing with, making line quality the way I wanted it to be, and stuff like that.
And was this kind of the first time maps really entered into your art making practice?
Yeah, I was, we went through Harvey. That was such a big deal for us in Houston. Everyone has a Harvey story. And we were looking at the river coming up, and we're like, should we take our furniture to the second floor? And I'd wake up at 4 a.m, I'd run over to the bayou to see if it was where the levels were relative to us. And then I started thinking about what is the elevation of Houston. And I really got interested in what, sea level's coming up pretty fast, and everyone talks about what happens in 2100. It's maybe 8 feet or 3 feet. But what we haven't really talked about is that sea level's rising really fast in the year 2100. And it's accelerating. So I was like, well, what does that look like? And so I turned to paleoclimatology. I talked to,
what is paleoclimatology?
Yeah, right?
Wow, I've never,
I know, right?
That's a job.
That's the thing.
That's cool.
This guy wrote a book, Kurt Stager. He's out of Paul Smith's college, and a wonderful guy. I read the book. I wanted to get a sense for, he studies geology from a paleoclimatological perspective. So, and he could put, we're still, and he took my calls, and he worked with me, and he says, yeah, you're right. And he was like, pretty much if we kind of continue what we're doing now, within 300 to 3,000 years, we'll be at about 20 to 23 feet of sea level rise. And that blew my mind, and I
Yeah.
wanted to bring that into my art somehow.
I see. So you're the kind of the science brain, the scientist in you got switched on
Yeah.
first in
Yeah.
this, and
Yeah.
then I'm really, to go like maybe slightly off topic, but this
Yeah.
is something that I really wanted to ask you is,
Yeah.
can you just talk a little bit about how does your background as a scientist, and I mean, how do scientists and artists approach problems or forms or presentations, like similar and differently? I'm really curious if you have any thoughts about
Yeah.
how those disciplines can inform each other, not just
Yeah.
for your practice that sort of has like this explicit connection
Yeah.
between the two, but if you could just sort of step back and talk about approach in the disciplines and what's similar and what's different, if you have any thoughts
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Well, I would probably couch this. I mean, it's hard to speak beyond my own experience,
Of course.
you know.
Yeah.
But I'll speak. You know, I was an art history major, so my favorites were the abstract expressionists, and they tended to speak from they at least were explicitly trying to speak from the unconscious. And to me, the most successful art for me speaks from the unconscious.
I see.
And then as a viewer, for me, the most powerful art also, it speaks to me at almost an unconscious level. So for me, that's where like the realm of fine art has always been. And then for science, it's much more rational. You're drawing lines, you know, there's an hypothesis, you're checking it. And then, so yeah, I think, so for me as an artist, to try to bring that together has been about trying to allow, you know, that unconscious part of myself to express itself through the work.
Certainly.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I find your thoughts about it really interesting, that that in science there's like this testing, right? It's like it's this sense of there's like you may know the reasoning behind why this is happening, but you have to test to get there. So there's still something that's a little like an inquiry of something that's enigmatic. There's still like this kind of working towards visualizing something,
that's
so
a good
working
point.
towards, or like you see something happening, so how do you work towards understanding it? Whereas in art, it's maybe like putting something enigmatic out there from the go, and then afterwards, you're working towards sort of understanding what it is that you did. What is it that got, you know, the composition to look like this? You know, kind of working. One's like maybe working forwards, the other's working backwards in some ways.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
That's interesting. Well, let's turn back to this the work that you're doing now and the maps and sea level rise and things.
Let's see. So that one, I'll just go over to. And this was a installation at Rice, where it was about, I want to say it was about 4,000 pounds of ice that was stacked on top of a map and sat in a basin. And then the map, and there was an LED light that was solar powered. And then the ice melted in these wonderful shapes. And I filmed it melting. It was just so beautiful. And then we projected, and then there was the basin with all the water, and this is like this sat outside for a month, and then we projected the map, I mean the melting ice behind the map with the basin.
That's stunning.
And this was kind of the next phase in the map making, and then here was an installation at Sawyer Yards, and this was a story. This was making artisanal ice in August, in the back, and basically in my front yard there was an ice trailer. So that was about 3,000 pounds of ice, and this is what it looked like as it was melting. And there's kind of this, like you can see, it was like this rough frame and this cinder block, because that's what Sawyer Yards was like. And then it melted, and this basin, there's a shot of the ice melting. It's just so beautiful.
Yeah,
it's just so stunning. And then that sat outside for about a year, and people started throwing coins into it. I think it was my most lucrative art project. And
wishing away climate change, one could only hope.
Right. So that kind of brings you up to speed on the map side of things on the map making and recent projects until we get to the piece that
right.
we were here to.
Yeah, I think one comment I want to make about the maps that I find, what I always find really interesting in talking to you is the seamlessness with which you think about like time and geology together. You know, I just think about, you know, maps picture the surface of the earth, but the surface of the earth is a measurement of time. And I just, right. And I often just find in your work that like the seamlessness with which those ideas go together. But, you know, whenever I watch anything about astronomy and like time and space gets so conflated and my mind just breaks. Whereas with you, you do have this way of imaging it that it processes for me.
Oh, cool. That's so wonderful to hear.
Yeah, and so I guess I just wanted to stop and kind of have that comment about your work when we're talking about concepts like deep time, like where does one kind of like find their entry point into really kind of, you know, material, like really holding on to that, like grasping onto that concept is, I think, really in some ways really critical to your work and really critical to the work of our place in the earth and relation to climate change and things like that. It's really critical to, I think, to like actually kind of glom on to a particularity within that. So that being said, let's continue talking about where maps in your practice have taken you.
Sure.
So let's look at some of the most recent work in your practice.
This one?
That one. The one that we've conveniently placed behind you for everyone to see.
Well, this started out, this was a map that, so I was working with the maps for these 2D maps. And one of the curators from the Museum of Natural History came through my studio and heard me talking about it and said, oh, can you make that into a 3D, video? So, you know, so sure. And made a, I'll tell you what, we'll maybe see it later, but it shows Galveston in it, and it shows water levels coming up on that 2D map over time with the date. And I made that for the museum. And, but then it got me into this world of modeling, because it wasn't just GIS software, and it was modeling it, and it allowed me to go into, so this software is really cool because I could make a 3D video. What I wanted to do is fly through downtown Houston and show what it would look like in the year 2550 under a high carbon output scenario. And you could see, it was called Houston, and an idea was like Houston on the Sea. And then I was really lucky because you know, I sat next to Andrew Revkin in a conference, and he says, oh, you need to go talk to this guy from Peter Clark from Oregon State University, who had like done this research to show future climate change under different climate change scenarios, sea level rise with dates.
I see.
So I was able to go back under a high CO2 scenario and build this model. And I talked to professors at University of Houston about LiDAR data, and could I do this thing where I had this semi-transparent buildings and you could see through them and have he said, no, you can't do that. I'm like, yeah, you can. Because this is all new. It's all new stuff.
Right. You know? So you have scenarios. So you've made kind of fly-throughs that are scenarios of high CO2 levels, and then also something that's more if we start to mitigate these levels. So you've made kind of two scenarios for people to see.
That's right. And I think you're zoning in on something that I think you know me well enough now to see that I'm an optimist. And I think most of our climate, you know, I actually looked at this, and most of our CO2 output is in our future. So we've actually not put out a whole lot compared to what is under the high CO2 scenario is like an order of magnitude higher, if not, not more. So we actually have quite a ability to make change if we start.
That's interesting. I hadn't realized that that's how the data really operates, that when it's looking into the future like that, it's not assuming kind of current levels. It's actually looking at the way, it's projecting the way levels are thought to increase.
That's right.
And then that's how it gets accelerated.
That's right.
Huh.
I'll have to show you some really interesting graphics.
Okay.
Like it shows the state of Texas covered in how much coal equivalent.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Well, let's take a look at
let's do it.
Let's take a look at the video.
Okay. So that is video. Okay. So this is the video, and it shows you. It's an augmented reality video.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at this map. You look at this painting,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll pull it up here. It's number 5. Let's pull that. Does that work? And we're still on. So you look at it through your iPhone, and you hit this Blip Art app. You scan it, and then you get this augmented reality, and the painting evolves into this fly through. Where you've got, and that's the Natural History Museum.
Ah, wow.
And that's Memorial Park. That's the outdoor theater, Miller Outdoor Theater. The museum district's in the background. And then you get, and then we're going to, and right way back in the background, you can see downtown Houston, and that's the shoreline.
My old house is gone. Goodness.
It's yeah. And that shows you. Now we're kind of zooming in to the painting with the iPhone. Now I'll zoom back out, and you can see the whole painting. And you can see that's the Buffalo Bayou behind you, and you can see that there's a little like Houston sitting on a little island by Buffalo Bayou.
Yeah.
And
that's really fascinating.
And we'll zoom back out, and the trick in being able to model this was kind of limiting the space at which I looked. So just cutting out, making it something that.
Yeah. And also, I mean, the decision making too is all about making the building transparent and things like that is really, I think, is really critical too.
Here's a view of the same thing without looking at it through the iPhone. So you can get it's a more stable view,
right?
Without the handshake. But this is what you'd see on your iPhone if you did the augmented reality piece of it.
Very fascinating to bring these two media together like that. And then in some ways, I mean, does it have the potential to, like, can you upload different data sets in theory? And so you can kind of change what it is that you're modeling, or change the year, or change the This is the year 2550 under high carbon output, and this is about 46 feet of sea level rise per Peter Clark. I can't tell you off the top of my head what it would be under the low CO2 scenario, but it's on the order. It's less than 10 feet. So there's a way in which this work is a very living work. It's it doesn't. It's a. And I want to use the word. I don't want to use the word unstable, but I think you see what I'm getting at. It's like it can be updated. It progresses. It's something that can kind of change depending on what data set you enter into this. Yeah. But I think also those different levels and the way the work can get updated, I think has also happened to this object physically, right? Can you talk a little bit about, we talked about one of them, about how these things come together. Can you talk a little bit about this painting specifically and the process that went into making it and the different points of time in which you have worked on it?
Yeah, absolutely. This one actually was part of the fossils of the Anthropocene. It went into an exhibit, and it was called Ellen's Green Dice. It's a piece of plastic dice, and it was one of those childhood toys. And it was a beautiful painting, but I didn't sell it, and I don't have space for it, and so I painted over it. And I sanded away parts of it to expose the resin underneath. It was one of those hydrostone pours with lots of layers of resin and all kinds of pigments and things happening in it. And then I decided to put in this drawing of the museum. I started with the map. And so I put in, like, you can see this like lattice work of streets, and you can see the sea level if you look closely. And then this was right around the time of the pandemic hitting. And so I was really, going through those emotional it was, anger and grief and, and so I took, I don't know if you almost can't really make it out here, but there's running across the whole canvas, there's a graph that shows like exponential rise in pandemic cases. And then there's little place, like there's a fallen, like a scribble that's the falling stock markets.
You can kind of see them in here. Perhaps we can switch to, I guess like the lower left corner, I think is one of these. I wanted to talk a little bit about it just because of that, the way that mapping and data and, grid systems is also met with this very high degree of gesture here as well. And so I just find that really, it's almost like this formal representation of what we were talking about before, of like there's this rational part of your practice that brings in data sets, but then there's also this engagement with like expressionism and sort of finding that moment with to take yourself to your art and sort of have that moment as well. So like this like slower process of building up these layers through mapping and data, but then also having this like incredibly quick and like haphazard moment with your art as well, and sort of bringing those things together.
Yeah, that was so satisfying.
Yeah,
it was so satisfying. We haven't tried this. I can, let me see. You said you wanted to go a little closer. Maybe we can look at that. Is that what you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, if you can sort of bring people around this a little bit. Yeah, just for a second to bring that around for people.
Let's make that full screen, and I think we can do that. I'm not sure. Oh yeah, here we go. So we'll do that temporarily. And now you can see like some of the scribbling, some of the line work.
Because just the depth and the layers on this painting are really exquisite. Rewards close looking.
Hey, thank you. So there's some sort of following this zigzag line of you can see some of the marks that are made by the moving water, the physical, actual moving water. And there's a piece, there's like one of the, that's the Monopoly house that's been run through a rock tumbler. And then these little circles are all little pandemic cities. Remember the Washington Post was putting in circles to represent the size and the magnitude of the attacks. And up here is in Washington State, where my mother-in-law is. And so I was really concerned, thinking about her. And that was like right at the point when I made this map, that was like the biggest outbreak.
Right.
And so that's where that was from.
I see. Yeah, so if you could, I think I'll just ask one more kind of big wrap-up kind of question, and then we'll move to see our questions if any questions are from our virtual audience. But I think the last thing I wanted to ask you, and this is something that I think about a lot, is, we're looking at this map it was 2550, is that the year that you were looking at? So how does a person living in 2020 that's on this planet, we'll say 75 years, understand that kind of, like, even just 500 years from now, how do we understand our place within the Anthropocene, which is the start of the Industrial Revolution? How do we understand? So I guess, how does it, understanding this problem requires thinking on pretty large scales.
That's right.
And so I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about if you see that as a hurdle for people to understanding climate change. Do you think that's a reasonable, do you think that's a reasonable criticism of people kind of having a hard time understanding it, making action towards it? And how do you get over that? Like, how do you do you think it's a reasonable criticism? And if so, how do we move past it?
I'm going to say two things. One is a process-related question. So if you're watching right now and you have a question, feel free to write it into your comment section or make a comment.
Great.
Because there's a little bit of a delay for us to see that. So if you want to make a question, now's the time to write it down. And I haven't seen any come in, so I hope that we're getting them. And then to answer that question, there's so many ways I could go with that. I mean, I studied geology in college. I found an arrowhead, and then in northern Minnesota, in the same place that I found this piece of, I showed you this before, I'll hold it in front of the screen. This is a piece of coral that I found in Minnesota. It's fossilized coral, and it's called favosite. And you can see like you can probably see in the camera there, they're 5-sided polyp cells. And so this became such a formative part of me as a kid to find in the same place this seabed that had coral
In Minnesota.
In Minnesota, when sea levels were 200 feet higher, and then and then to find an arrowhead. This is a surrogate arrowhead because I lost the original. My parents threw out if you're watching, parents, I haven't forgotten. And, so to put that into context, it helped me to make the bridge between like Stone Age or recent history, like the last 2,000 years to geologic time, and then to start thinking about very recent time, and then again, my dad had studied astronomy, and we watched the Milky Way, and it was, really incredible. When I don't know if you want to see that video.
I think, we're at about. Okay. I want to leave some time for questions, unfortunately. Yeah. So
no, that's good. Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. But, here's a comment coming in.
But for anyone interested, Erik can, maybe we can post in the comments or something this wonderful video you have of the Hubble telescope.
That's a lovely idea.
Has been really helpful. It was a really nice experience for me again to think about how time and space go together and how minuscule we are in these actual kind of knowledge systems that we know to be, this knowledge system that we know to be true, and sort of places ourselves within this really grand scheme. So it's a really beautiful video. But I'm really curious to hear.
I'll put that in the comments for sure.
Your viewers are asking.
A lot of these are comments, so I'll just throw some in here, and we can you can look at, you can see them. I don't know if these will just disappear. Thank you. That's a nice comment. I'm just going to pull these in here. I haven't pre-screened these. Let's see. Water and oil do not mix. Absolutely. So people are.
Is there a couple questions in there?
Yeah. Let's see. A lot of comments. Here's a question. Let's see what this one says. Neutral, pessimistic, other. We kind of addressed that. I don't know when this comment came in. I'm an optimist.
Yeah.
People who know me know I'm an optimist. And, it's not like I'm trying to be didactic either. I'm just sharing what I'm passionate about. I'm not trying to even take a position. I'm just showing you what is. So that's, I think, the best answer.
I see. No, it is. It's useful. It's just it's fact based. It's not a scare tactic necessarily, but this that you do sort of have this faith that when Houston looks like that, we'll have figured something out, or we'll be doing something differently, or that
that was something that was so cool about this. I'm going to make another plug for this. It's a really great book if anyone hasn't had the chance to read it, but he talks about our ability to adapt in this book, Kurt Stager, and I think it's very optimistic as well. 500 years time, we have a lot of time to adapt. So it might not be the most optimal best case. But let's see if there's any other questions in here. Oh, there's some sweet comments. Thank you, folks. Let's see. And here, what year is this image again? I think the map behind me, this was just done. And it's the augmented reality of Houston under high sea. Oh, that answers the question. Raj just answered the question. The image is the augmented reality version of what Houston will look like in the year 2500 under a high CO2 carbon scenario.
Great. Yeah. Maybe we can scroll to the end of that chain of inquiries and see the last sort of questions that have come
Sounds good. Yeah, there's a lot of comments here. Here's one. Are you going to continue this series? Can people see that? I'm still working on this. This was I was thinking, that's a great question. I would like to answer this one. This was a prototype, and before the pandemic hit, I wanted to make this as a prototype of, it's a big painting. It would go well in a museum setting, and I wanted to make 10 more maps of either U.S. cities or cities around the world.
I see.
And then make that something that toured around on, and make that a goal. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And I'm like, oh, great. Yeah. Now, museums are laying people off, and so it's like, well,
things are changing really quickly.
They are. Yeah. So what I'm thinking is maybe doing this virtually. So getting away from the physical objects is, but I don't know, because I love working with my hands.
Of course.
So I'm as lost as anybody, so I don't know what to do. And then let's see. I'm just going to randomly throw. I see that's a question. I'm going to throw it in there. We can read it together and see what it says. Ooh, that's a great idea. Yeah, getting an interactive component would be really cool, because somebody would want to see what would this look like under different scenarios.
Right. So people could ask different scenarios of it
while they're there in front of it. Okay, what is the low? What do these different scenarios look like? That's a great idea.
Certainly. Or maybe there could also be something where they put in like an address, or in addition to like what year, maybe they put in an address or a place or a location or something.
Yeah.
And just kind of.
Yeah. Of course, that takes away like that's such a rational. That kind of has been done. There are. I think it's been done for I've seen that for up to the year 2100.
I see.
Nobody's done it for longer periods.
Right.
But it also takes away that unconscious art making, to make the piece and make it integrated. For me, is the fun of it. But there's certainly an application here. Let's see what Mr. Cushing has to say. Uncanniness. I don't know what Mr. Cushing means by uncanniness.
Well, I think is there an element of the kind of the world made strange, the world made surreal, the world kind of almost like this sense of like parallel unknown world in it. If that's something that you see kind of coming out of your work at times.
Yeah. I'm a little, it's just comes so naturally that it just feels like this reality. Like I almost see, as a water resources engineer doing water planning moving forward, it almost feels like parallel world, surreal, but almost to me more concrete.
I see.
I
see. Yeah,
it's like
absolutely.
I'm an engineer.
Yeah.
How are we doing for time?
We are. I would say we can take maybe 2 or 3 more questions. We're at 11:52.
Oh yeah! Wow, that's been a good time. Here's one last comment. I think this might be a comment. Oh, neat. Oh, what a wonderful, sentiment. If anyone has ideas for grant agencies to make this work possible, it'd be really cool to get, an institutional support behind this project to make it happen, So
Certainly.
If anyone has ideas or approaches, I did reach out to the Climate Museum, and I know that they're watching. So that's a neat. I think they're really interested in this virtual space, and it's a neat
Absolutely.
idea. But other,
Yeah, I think one of the best things that artists can do right now is we are in this real space of the unknown of how do we get kind of the physical things artists are making out in front of people. So I think the more conversations people have, more brainstorming sessions people have about what could be great for this virtual space, not something that's like a placeholder because we're in a pandemic, but what is something that would make sense for this moment, what makes sense for this moment, beyond this moment in this virtual space, and how do you connect people? Because there is just a lot of potential there. It's
there really is.
It really is. So well, if are there any more questions you wanted to take a look at?
That was the last question.
Okay.
So good.
Well, perhaps if you could just sort of tell people that want to know more, where do they find you online?
Sure.
Yeah, and if people want to see some of these, see more images of these works, can you just kind of share with everyone?
Yeah.
How
Okay.
they do
So
that?
my website, I guess, let's see if I can pull in a text. So website is Erik Hagen Studio. Just search Erik Hagen and artist Houston. It'll all pop up.
Great.
And then I think if we're about to end, Matt Adams was going to say a few words about other.
Absolutely.
Cool.
So we'll thank you everyone for watching. I'll say if you wanna find me. I'm at the Mineral Drawing Institute when it opens again. there's Erik's cat bidding everyone his adieus as well. And yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kelly. It was such an honor to be here and speak with you, and you had such really great questions.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I'll turn it over to Matt. He'll talk to you more about what VAA is doing, what our schedule. We've got some exciting, there's other things going on that he wants to talk about.
Perfect.
So let's see. That is play. I'll bring this down here and let Matt. Oops. And here it is. Thanks, everybody.
Hello again. Matt is back, and I have some details for you for this month. Let's see. So I mentioned third Monday. That is every third Monday of the month is Artist Critique Night. It's via Zoom. The Sketch Social is the third Wednesday of every month. That is also on the Zoom platform. Importantly, if you are a VA volunteer, you have already received the prospectus for the 13th Juried Invitational Show. So that call for entries is currently open. If you are a regular member of VAA, we have the 37th Juried Membership Exhibit. That prospectus is open and available on our website. It is free. It is for members only. The juror that we have hired is the art critic for the LA Weekly. She's very excited to have another connection with Houston. She loves Houston. So we're very excited to have her on board as our juror. The exhibit itself will be a virtual exhibit on the exhibit.com platform. Just as you're getting used to Zoom these days, you're going to get used to online virtual exhibits. And we have chosen to use the exhibit.com platform. So that's the exhibitions coming up. And the next program, we're going to take July off for programs, and we're working on details for the August program. So I think that's all for now. Again, follow us on Facebook, follow us on the website, and the email is always open to you. I look forward to seeing you somehow soon. Thanks. Bye.